Gifted education, talented and gifted, or GT, is a broad term for special practices, procedures, and theories used in the education of children who have been identified as gifted or talented. There is no standard global definition of what a gifted student is. In 2011, the National Association for Gifted Children published a position paper that defined what a gifted student is. The term "gifted" in that position paper describes individuals who demonstrate outstanding aptitude or competence in one or more domains. And aptitude is there defined as an exceptional ability to learn or reason. Competence is defined as documented performance or achievement in the top 10% of the population. History. Classical era to Renaissance. Gifted and talented education dates back thousands of years. Plato advocated providing specialized education for intellectually gifted young men and women. In China's Tang dynasty, child prodigies were summoned to the imperial court for specialized education. Throughout the Renaissance, those who exhibited creative talent in art, architecture, and literature were supported by both the government and private patronage. Sir Francis Galton. One of the earliest Western studies of human abilities was conducted by Sir Francis Galton, who between 1888 and 1894 developed and compiled measurements of over 7,500 individuals to gauge their natural intellectual abilities. In his studies he determined that if a parent deviates from the norm, so will the child, but to a lesser extent. One of the earliest observed examples of regression towards the mean. Galton believed that people could be improved through interventions in heredity, a movement he named eugenics. He categorized people into gifted, capable, average, or degenerate and recommended breeding between the first two categories, and forced abstinence for the latter two. His term for the most intelligent and talented people was eminent, and after studying England's most prominent families, concluded that one's eminence was directly related to his direct hereditary line. Lewis Terman at Stanford University in 1918. Lewis Terman adapted Alfred Binet's Simon intelligence test into the Stanford Binet test, and introduced intelligence quotient scoring for the test. According to Terman, the IQ was one's mental age compared to one's chronological age, based on the mental age norms he compiled after studying a sample of children. He defined intelligence as the ability to carry on abstract thinking. During World War I, Terman was a commissioned officer of the United States Army, and collaborated with other psychologists in developing intelligence tests for new recruits to the armed forces. For the first time, intelligence testing was given to a wide population of drafted soldiers. After the war, Terman undertook an extensive longitudinal study of 643 children in California who scored at IQ 140 or above. The genetic studies of genius, continuing to evaluate them throughout their lives. Subjects of these case studies were called termites, and the studies contacted the children in 1921, and again in 1930, 1947, and 1959 after his death. Terman's studies have to date been the most extensive on high-functioning children, and are still quoted in psychological literature today. Terman claimed to have disproven common misconceptions, such as that highly intelligent children were prone to ill physical and mental health, that their intelligence burned out early in their lives, or that they either achieved greatly or underachieved. Letta Hollingworth, a professional colleague of Terman's. Letta Hollingworth was the first in the United States to study how best to serve students who showed evidence of high performance on tests. Although recognizing Terman's and Galton's beliefs that heredity played a vital role in intelligence, Hollingworth gave similar credit to home environment and school structure. Hollingworth worked to dispel the pervasive belief that bright children take care of themselves, and emphasized the importance of early identification, daily contact, and grouping gifted children with others with similar abilities. Hollingworth performed an 18-year-long study of 50 children in New York City who scored 155 or above on the Stanford Binet, and studied smaller groups of children who scored above a 180. She also ran a school in New York City for bright students that employed a curriculum of student-led exploration, as opposed to a teacher providing students with a more advanced curriculum they would encounter later in life. The Cold War one unforeseen result of the launch of Sputnik by the Soviet Union was the immediate emphasis on education for bright students in the United States, and this settled the question whether the federal government should get involved in public education at all. The National Defense Education Act was passed by Congress in 1958 with $1 billion US to bolster science, math, and technology in public education. Educators immediately pushed to identify gifted students and serve them in schools. Students chosen for gifted services were given intelligence tests with a strict cutoff, usually at 130, which meant that students who scored below the 130 were not identified. Marland report the impact of the NDEA was evident in schools for years after, but a study on how effective education was meeting the needs of gifted students was initiated by the United States Department of Education in 1969. The Marland report, completed in 1972, for the first time presented a general definition of giftedness, and urged districts to adopt it. The report also allowed students to show high functioning on talents and skills not measurable by an intelligence test. The Marland report defined gifted as children capable of high performance include those with demonstrated achievement and/or potential ability in any of the following areas, singly or in combination: general intellectual ability, specific academic aptitude, creative or productive thinking, leadership ability, visual and performing arts, or psychomotor ability. The report's definition continues to be the basis of the definition of giftedness in most districts and states. A Nation at Risk in 1983, the result of an 18-month-long study of secondary students, was published as A Nation at Risk, and claimed that students in the United States were no longer receiving superior education, and in fact, could not compete with students from other developed countries in many academic exercises. One of the recommendations the book made was to increase services to gifted education programs, citing curriculum enrichment or acceleration specifically. The U.S. federal government was also urged to create standards for the identification and servicing of gifted students. Jacob Javits Gifted and Talented Students Education Act. The Jacob Javits Gifted and Talented Students Education Act was passed in 1988 as part of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Instead of funding district-level gifted education programs, the Javits Act instead has three primary components: the research of effective methods of testing, identification, and programming, which is performed at the National Research Center on the Gifted and Talented, the awarding of grants to colleges, states, and districts that focus on underrepresented populations of gifted students, and grants awarded to state and districts for program implementation. Annual funding for grants must be passed by U.S. Congress, and totaled $9.6 million US in 2007, but the money isn't promised. While he was president, George W. Bush eliminated the money every year of his term, but members of Congress overrode the president to make sure the grant money is distributed. No Child Left Behind. The most recent U.S. federal education initiative was signed into law in 2002. The goal of No Child Left Behind is to bring proficiency of all students to grade level, but critics note it does not address the needs of gifted students who perform above grade level. The act imposes punishments on schools, administrators, and teachers when students do not achieve to the plan's designs, but does not address any achievement standards for high-functioning students, forcing schools and teachers to spend their time with low-achieving students. An article in the Washington Post declared, "The unmistakable message to teachers, and to students, is that it makes no difference whether a child barely meets the proficiency standard or far exceeds it. Gifted services have been recently eroding as a result of the new legislation." According to a 2006 article in the New York Times, A Nation Deceived in 2004, the John Templeton Foundation sponsored a report titled A Nation Deceived: How Schools Hold Back America's Brightest Students, highlighting the disparity between the research on acceleration and the educational practices in the U.S. that are often contrary to the conclusions of that research. The Institute for Research and Policy on Acceleration was established in 2006 at the Connie Bellin and Jacqueline N. Blank International Center for Gifted Education and Talent Development at the University of Iowa College of Education through the support of the John Templeton Foundation. Following the publication of this report, studies of giftedness, the development of early intelligence tests by Alfred Binet led to the Stanford Binet IQ test developed by Louis Terman. Terman began long-term studies of gifted children with a view to checking if the popular view, early ripe, early rot, was true. The Terman genetic studies of genius longitudinal study has been described by successor researchers who conducted the study after Terman's death, and also by an independent researcher who had full access to the study files. Modern studies by James and Kulik conclude that gifted students benefit least from working in a mixed-level class, and benefit most from learning with other similarly advanced students in accelerated or enriched classes. Definition of giftedness: educational authorities differ on the definition of giftedness. Even when using the same IQ test to define giftedness, they may disagree on what gifted means. One may take up the top 2% of the population. Another might take up the top 5% of a population, which may be within a state, district, or school. Within a single school district, there can be substantial differences in the distribution of measured IQ. In Identifying Gifted Children, A Practical Guide, Susan K. Johnson explains that gifted children all exhibit the potential for high performance in the areas included in the United States federal definition of gifted and talented students. The term gifted and talented, when used in respect to students, children, or youth, means those who show evidence of high performance capability in areas such as intellectual, creative, artistic, or leadership capacity, or in specific academic fields, and who require services or activities not ordinarily provided by the school in order to fully develop such capabilities. PL 103-382, Title 14, 388. The National Association for Gifted Children in the United States defines giftedness as: gifted individuals are those who demonstrate outstanding levels of aptitude or competence in one or more domains. Domains include any structured area of activity with its own symbol system in, or set of sensory motor skills. The development of ability or talent is a lifelong process. It can be evident in young children as exceptional performance on tests and/or other measures of ability, or as a rapid rate of learning compared to other students of the same age, or in actual achievement in a domain. As individuals mature through childhood to adolescence, however, achievement and high levels of motivation in the domain become the primary characteristics of their giftedness. Various factors can either enhance or inhibit the development and expression of abilities. This definition has been adopted in part or completely by the majority of the states in the United States. Most have some definition similar to that used in the state of Texas, whose definition states, "The phrase, gifted and talented student, means a child or youth who performs at or shows the potential for performing at a remarkably high level of accomplishment when compared to others of the same age." experience, or environment, and who exhibits high performance capability in an intellectual, creative, or artistic area, possesses an unusual capacity for leadership, or excels in a specific academic field. 74th Legislature of the State of Texas, Chapter 29, Subchapter D. Section 29.121. The major characteristics of these definitions are the diversity of areas in which performance may be exhibited, the comparison with other groups, and the use of terms that imply a need for development of the gift. Reliance on IQ. In her book, Identifying Gifted Children, A Practical Guide, Susan K. Johnson writes that schools should use a variety of measures of students' capability and potential when identifying gifted children. These measures may include portfolios of student work, classroom observations, achievement measures, and intelligence scores. Most educational professionals accept that no single measure can be used in isolation to accurately identify every gifted child. Even if the notion of IQ is generally useful for identifying academically talented students who would benefit from further services, the question of the cutoff point for giftedness is still important. As noted above, different authorities often define giftedness differently.